What's up, guys? Didn't see you there. Well, since you decided to stop by, I do greatly appreciate it, and thanks again for clicking on the video. We're back with trusty old whiteboard, and what I'm going to be doing here is a little video series about particular vitamins and whether or not you should take them. And the first vitamin we're going to go over, vitamin D, the sunshine vitamin. Now, vitamin D is responsible for many things within our body, but its foundational purpose is to help with intestinal absorption of magnesium, phosphate, and most importantly that you all will understand, calcium, to help build strong bones. Well, there's a bone under there somewhere. Another big factor vitamin D plays functionally within our body is helps in the regulation of cell growth, our immune function or system, and reduction of inflammation in joints and tissues and muscles. Now logically, you all may be wondering, why is it called the sunshine vitamin? Well, that's a great question. Because we absorb vitamin D from the sun. Well, how do we absorb it from the sun? If only were that easy. Oh wait, it is. And here's how. So in terms of outside the body, the sun's UV rays shine down on our skin, our exposed skin. There's you see me with tiny little biceps. And then what happens within the body is cholesterol that our body produces on its own is converted into vitamin D because of the sunlight. Now it's a lot more complex from that, but in terms of simplicity, that's basically how vitamin D is created from the sun and subsequently in our body. So then, why do we need vitamin D? Well, kind of like I alliterated to in the beginning about the 3 essential vitamins and nutrients that it helps in, the biggest portion of that is from calcium. Calcium is what basically keeps our bones strong and intact. It was originally discovered, vitamin D was, in the 1930s to help prevent rickets from happening. And basically what rickets was just a breakdown of bones. Particularly it happened a lot in children. So what rickets did was basically decrease calcium absorption, which can lead to a lot more stress on the bones and actually led to a lot more stress fractures within bones. But because of what we know now about vitamin D, rickets is very rarely seen nowadays. So in conclusion of why we need vitamin D, the biggest reason is to help calcium absorption, to help prevent rickets, and to help keep our bones nice and strong. So a few random or fun facts about vitamin D. First off, it was the 4th vitamin that was discovered, so I'm going to blow y'all's mind a little bit. The reason vitamins are called A, B, C, and D, you thought it was some elaborate scientific thing. Not at all. It was the order in which they were discovered. So vitamin D was the 4th vitamin that was discovered, like I mentioned earlier. And also, you won't see vitamin D listed on every single food like you will, or food label like you will vitamin A or vitamin C. That's because vitamin D is what's called non-essential, meaning our body produces it on its own from the sun exposure, so we don't need to get it in from foods. At the same time, the recommended daily allowance, if you do see it on some foods, is based on us receiving none of it from the sun exposure. So the government basically thinks that we don't get enough sun exposure, and they're right, so they think we need to get all of our vitamin D from food. So unfortunately, vitamin D isn't found naturally in most foods, so what a lot of food companies will do is they'll what's called fortification of vitamin D, so they'll add it in to their manufacturing process. So that's when you see the vitamin D listed in milks and yogurts and a lot of dairy products, is that's been fortified. That's vitamin D that has been added. In terms of the best natural foods that have high amounts of vitamin D, the first food is salmon. So a standard 3.5 ounce serving of salmon will get you about 87% of the recommended daily allowance for a human individual. Canned tuna at about 45% of your daily value of vitamin D in your standard, 2 to 3 ounce serving that you get in canned tuna. And then a big one is actually egg yolks. So for each egg yolk, you're getting about 7% of your daily value of vitamin D. This is why, there's this craze for egg whites and I have to get rid of all the fat from the egg yolks. But once you get rid of all the fat from the egg yolks, you also get rid of all the nutrients. So this demonization of egg yolks is totally misleading. I eat about 4 eggs a day, full yolks in each one of them, because of all the nutrients and minerals that are in the yolks themselves. And it's great to get vitamin D from foods, there's nothing wrong with that, but in my opinion the best overall way is just to simply walk outside in the sun. There are so many benefits associated with just walking out in the sun, and your geographical location plays a big part in the absorption of vitamin D from the sunlight. Now just a little simplistic depiction here. You have, pretend this median line right here is the equator, the median across the earth. The closer you are to living near the equator, the stronger the ultraviolet rays are from the sun. That's why it's generally hotter closer to the equator. So it's easier to absorb that vitamin D from the sunlight. But as you get farther north and south from the equator, it's actually harder. That's why Europeans are more likely than most Americans to have vitamin D deficiencies. But then if you go to, South America and African countries that are closer to the equator, they've actually shown studies that they have higher levels of vitamin D. All right, now I'm going to talk about few studies I read and some key findings from those several studies. The first one followed 40,000 elderly people, and found that increasing vitamin D consumption to 800 IUs per day, and just for a measurement, about 500 IUs a day can be found from your standard 3.5 ounce portion of salmon. And it actually found that reduced bone fractures in both the hip and non-spinal fractures by about 20%. And the second one I found was a meta-analysis, which for those of you who don't know is just studies done about other studies. And it basically found that in elderly people, again, fall risk was reduced by 19% from increasing vitamin D supplementation to around 800 IUs per day. And then another big one I found followed 50,000 men around for 10 years and found that men who had lower vitamin D levels were twice as likely to fall victim to heart attack. So here are a few major disease impacts that vitamin D can have, and a lot of these again have that big geographical locational factor played into them. First one being multiple sclerosis, so what people know as MS. Basically it's nerve damage or nerve breakdown. It's an autoimmune disease, and it's shown that MS rates are normally higher the further north and south you get from the equator, which again equates, no pun intended, to that lack of vitamin D and that lack of adequate sunshine exposure. And the second one being type 1 diabetes. Again, this is another autoimmune disease. Type 2 is adult onset. And a study was performed where they followed 300 Finnish children for 10 years and found that adequate vitamin D intake reduced their risk for type 1 diabetes by upwards of 90%. Then another one being just the regular common cold. Vitamin D levels are actually lowest for most people during the winter months because the sun isn't out as much during the day, so you just get less overall exposure to vitamin D. And children who have higher vitamin D levels are actually less likely to have respiratory infections. And now the most important thing that you guys probably want to take away from this video is, when should I supplement with vitamin D? Now, in my opinion, the best way to get adequate vitamin D is for maybe 10 to 15 minutes a day, just go walk out in the sunlight. But Nick, what happens if it's cloudy or it's rainy and I can't? There's an example of where ideally you should either transition to maybe eating salmon during that time period where there's a lot of clouds there, increasing your eggs consumption, maybe canned tuna. And if you're totally against even doing that, then that at last resort is when I would recommend vitamin D. So say during the winter months when the sun's not out and you're just at work all day long and you're just not getting enough exposure, and for whatever reason you're just not getting enough fish or eggs in your diet, then maybe I'd recommend taking a vitamin D supplement. Now during the summer, I feel like there's a lot less excuses to not be walking outside for just 10-15 minutes. That's all you need. There are some studies that even so you just need about a half hour a week to get adequate vitamin D absorption. If you're very rarely getting out into the sunlight, and say you live extremely north of the equator, then maybe vitamin D supplement would be adequate. Alright guys, thanks for clicking on the video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I will talk to you guys next time. I'm gonna go get my vitamin D in.